Hi everyone. Welcome to probably the strangest, well, I'd say yes, the strangest Christmas ever from St. Catherine of Siena, Houston, 2020. And I imagine that, like many of you, we will be glad to see the end of this. Now, like most, I would say this year, we might be tending towards a pity party and maybe have very good reason as well. But may I say, you are in very good company. This is the first time that my Christmas is virtual. You know, we're in this together. I would suggest to keep your sanity and stay above the water level. Contact people, Zoom them. I mean, a hello to my beloved family, whom I haven't seen in over a year in Ireland. Looking forward to whenever it will be, but I would imagine it's going to be at least a year. They might be saying, oh, good. But anyway, I don't care. And a happy Christmas to all of them. A happy Christmas to those of you in Canada. Merry Christmas to the US Americans and whoever else is looking in here. A few thoughts to keep Christmas at some sane level. Besides the virtual contacting people, either by video link or an email, I would say the human voice first and foremost. Telephone call. They're now, international calls are, well, actually, they're free on multiple apps. The other thing to do, I think, would be, just from the experience of those here in the parish, in an urban setting, some are having Christmas gatherings in a drive-by. They're not getting out of their car, they're keeping their masks on, and the host house at a good arm's length is handing hot chocolate to the driver and children. And the more dangerous things like mulled wine and eggnog to the adult passengers. And maybe something sweet to go with it. But it is nice to see a face. It's nice to see people smiling. And it is what it is. It is curtailed. But however curtailed it is, Christmas has not been cancelled. It is still here. Make the best of it. For those of you who are here in the parish and watch the virtual parish. I never knew or expected that we would have a St. Catherine of Siena virtual parish, wherever you may be. There are 2 links on the webpage to a children's version of how Santa Claus came about, the history of St. Nicholas of Myra. It's worth reading, and with your children, to realize this wasn't made up by some consumer association just to make money and get you to buy, notwithstanding that's part of it, but it came from a much richer tradition. There's also a link for the adults, and it is not for children in the sense that it's technical, it's historical, but it's fascinating to read the history and the development of how the Bishop of Myra, who became St. Nicholas, turned into this chubby, white-bearded Santa Claus that we have. I would say read it. It might be a very good distraction, and I would say, well, I found it incredibly enlightening. There was a lot about Christmas and Santa and the rest that I just did not know. We inherit it, we do it, we partake. I would say go there. The icon on the parish webpage is an icon of St. Nicholas of Myra, of which there are many, by the way. It was given to me by a parishioner who was visiting Paris some years ago. In fact, it was bought in Notre Dame Cathedral. So all these connections, that's the icon of St. Nicholas that we have on the parish webpage. Make the best of this day. Don't get lost in the isolation. There are lots of possibilities. So Merry Christmas, Happy Christmas. Enjoy it to the best of your ability. And for those of you who may be constrained to the isolation of hospital, nursing homes, elder care facilities, whatever term you use, Enjoy the food that's given to you. Enjoy the fact that you can hear a human voice, and look forward to the day now that thankfully there is a light shining in the darkness. The vaccines are arriving, but the emphasis now, from my perspective at least, is don't lose your patience. We have come this far, let's make it the rest of the way. And let's not endanger ourselves or anybody else. We have had good practice for this. However tired we may be, it's too early to give up. The dawn is coming. The scripture readings are coming up next. Read them, and when you come back, I will give you some background to the technicalities of the scripture readings and a few thoughts thereon to mull about and to use it as a prayer format today at some stage, or this evening whenever you are looking at this, to take you beyond your immediacy and the obvious sadness and the reality of it's not what it used to be. But as we get older, we realize it is never what it used to be. It slowly but surely changes. Numbers diminish. I know people who've had 14. One of the staff members here, she had 40 people in her house last year. And now it is diminished, but not completely lost. There's something to be learned out of it too, I think, from the perspective of what is the most important thing out of this feast, that now we're forced to choose. The gatherings, the food, the gifts are all expressions of being together, reminding ourselves of who and what we mean to each other. That hasn't changed. It just has to be expressed in a different way. And I think this will help us next year to maybe prioritize some of the things we do and maybe realize some of those invariably are not absolutely necessary. We can still enjoy ourselves, and I think we all look forward to being in each other's company again, whatever the fare is, whatever the food is, whatever the gifts are or aren't. These are the important things. Read the scriptures, just look at them. They are, I would say most of you remember them in your dreams. They are part and parcel of the scriptures that we hear every Christmas. They bring back these good memories and continue to do so. Look at them, and I will see you in a few minutes, wherever you may be. I will take longer than a few minutes. I have to put my mask on. Santa has arrived. Don't rush back to me. I might have to have an eggnog with him. See you, well, sort of shortly. Take care. Welcome back. And now that I know you have redesigned your evening or day and have a few tricks up your sleeve to make it an even better Christmas. The first passage from Isaiah, it speaks of the yearning and the promise of God to bring about an end to war and want. And he speaks of, the debris of the battlefield will be burnt. And he speaks about God will do this as God did it at Midian. That refers to God coming to save Gideon and God's people. He did it here. When Isaiah was writing this, he has in mind the defeat of the Assyrian Empire, which of course, by the way, comes about by the next superpower in the area, which is Babylon, and destroys Assyria. But when he says a child will be born and placed on the throne of David, the child to be born was probably a successor of David, maybe King Ahaz. We're not too sure. But we read it through Christian lenses, and we interpret it as Christ is the one who fulfills the role. Now, watch, whatever about the Assyrians being defeated by the Babylonians, through violence. This new king is given a series of royal titles, and this new regime and governance will be brought about by this peace, rather, will be brought about through living justly. It's through justice that peace comes about, and that's the difference. And this is the promise, and that is the challenge. Without justice, peace cannot exist. There may be a lack of war, but unless there is equity, decency, care for others, there won't be peace. People will revolt invariably, as we know. Titus, the passage was written to the Christians living in a predominantly non-Christian, non-Jewish city, pagans, and they're reminded that they should always express their belief in God's loving kindness by being zealous to do good works. Express to people what you believe, that God's care of everybody should be expressed in your care of them. Don't become what's known as sectarian and inward-looking. Go the opposite direction, outward-looking. And that's part of our Christmas as well. God comes for all of humanity, not for some and excluding others. Luke, we know the passage so well, and that probably is a problem in itself. The fact that Joseph, he's from the city of David, which is Jerusalem, is in Nazareth, highly likely reflects the circumstances of the day. And they have to go and be enrolled in a census. And the census was a way of collecting tribute for the empire, the Roman Empire in this instance. And that tribute is going to go to pay for the Roman army, the building of great temples, in fact, the building of great monumental city works and so on. So you have here the opening cultural comment about a society that is oppressed. They go to Nazareth, he who is of the house of David, and we're told that Mary is about to give birth. And of course, we all know the phraseology that there was no room at the inn. It is, technically, there's no two other ways around it, a very, very poor translation. When Luke uses the word inn later to describe where the Good Samaritan took the one who was beaten up and left half dead by the roadside, he uses a different term. The term he uses for inn here is the same term used again by Matthew and by Mark to describe the room where the Last Supper was. You could call it the dining room or a place of hospitality. It was the common area where one gathered. One could dine together and enjoy each other's company. When they went to Nazareth to be enrolled, Mary and Joseph were not the only ones. They go with multiple people to be enrolled, and when they arrive at what is highly likely a relative or a house of a neighbour, they're not the only ones. There is a downfall to the creche scenes, blame St. Francis, where he did a good job, that here's Mary in isolation, here's Joseph in isolation, throw in a few sheep and a donkey and an ox, and the schmaltz begins. They were part of a larger group. So when the text says there was no room, the technicality would be there was no space for them. Everybody else was there. They weren't the only ones. There was a throng of people. Ever end up somewhere where all the beds are taken and you have to figure out, well, who's going to sleep on the floor and on the air mattress? Trust me, that brings back memories of my Christmas as a child when the invading hordes of relatives, siblings and their children arrived and my mother and father are going, oh, dear God, here we go again. But now, payback time. Their children are doing it to them. These are the challenges. But you make space for the person, though it might not be adequate. That technically is the background. In a Palestinian house, by and large, of the non-wealthy, the space before the main part of the house, the interior space was somewhat lower, and it was used to house the domestic animals, of which there may have been no more than two. A goat or two, a sheep or two, maybe an ox, we don't know. But notwithstanding. So an animal or two would have been here. There would have been a trough, the term trough, highly likely hewn out of stone, not wooden, and with some feed in it. So when Mary and Joseph arrive at the door and all the beds are taken, all the cozy corners are gone, they don't turn them away. This is not about lack of hospitality. It's about the fact it just is a reality. And I don't know, use your imagination, who else was having a baby that night? It is best described as hasty hospitality. The woman is having a child. Let's not get into a dither over who has the bed, who hasn't, where are we going to put her. Let's deal with it here and now. How do you think Mary delivered the child? The crest scene sadly shows Mary and the child wrapped up in a lovely swaddling clothes like a Christmas bow and going, there was a midwife, and I assure you it was probably not Joseph. The extended family were there, the neighbours were there, the poor woman had help. God help us, how would humanity have survived by itself? These are the realities of it. I think sometimes we lose track of the normality of this. He is wrapped in swaddling clothes. It is the description of the birth of every child. Luke is saying God came among us, was born, was wrapped up like every beloved child that comes into this world at that stage in history. And swaddling clothes, I gather, was a thought that, it would keep the child from having an out-of-shape spine and etc., etc. But, that's by the by. The shepherds are told that there is good news. This good news is a term we use for gospel, and it's taken from the prophet Isaiah. And the good news then was, your time of captivity is over. God is going to do what God did in the passage from Isaiah this weekend, what he did at Midian. He will smash the yoke of the oppressor. But take note, from the same passage, it will not be done through violence. It will be done through justice. It will not be done by adding more suffering upon more suffering. That is the call of the Christian. And the government that's described in, the new government that's described in the Isaiah passage for, this is from the nighttime mass, describes a government and a peace that outlives injustice, because injustice has been overcome. Now, the shepherds are described as people who hear this news of God coming to redeem and to save God's people. And of course, as you know, the child is given the name God saves. That's what Jesus is. In English, Jesus translates Joshua. God saves. Joshua was the first to lead the Hebrew people across the Jordan into the promised land. God is leading us constantly. The new Joshua, Jesus in Greek, is Jesus. He is the one who leads us to a new place, if we're willing to follow. That's the whole point. When the passage talks about the shepherds and all people on whose favour God rests. Last Sunday, Gabriel's annunciation to Mary took her aback when he said, you are uniquely favoured. Full of grace is the term. You are uniquely favoured, meaning you are beloved by God in a unique manner. Being a woman, oh, but I'm not a priest in Jerusalem. Oh, I've everything against me. I'm a nobody. I am from nowhere. Irrelevant. That's the message of the gospel. Now, God's favour rests on those of good will. The doing of God's word. That's the responsibility and the challenge of the gospel. This new world that Christ enters and will challenge and confront its injustices will only ever be overcome by us becoming people who are willing to accept the reality of being favoured or beloved by God, as is everybody else. Hence the search for justice. And hence at Christmas, to realise that the people we find bothersome, the people who annoy us, are loved by God. And I know you're thinking to yourself, well, only God could love them. Well, yes, we're human, we're not God. but we have the capacity to go in that direction. Think of that for Christmas. The love of those that drive us crazy at times, that disappoint us, that annoy us. Here's how peace comes about. Here's how this new world, here's the dawn of a new age. We have to participate in it if it's going to happen. It's not going to be done for us. Well, maybe it will be done by others who are more courageous, but please join them. Now you can raise a glass and say, there's more here than meets the eye, whether it's chocolate, eggnog, mulled wine, or tea. It doesn't matter. Enjoy your Christmas, and believe it or not, there'll be an extra homily on the tail end of this, well, not this particular video, but for Holy Family. I hope you have a really enjoyable Christmas, despite the curtailments. Do as I'm doing, make the best of it. I hate to say it, it could be worse. And for some of you, it is already worse. But you are here. You have the ability to do something. You're not totally alone, even if you are physically distanced from. You have friends. You have people who love you. You have people that you love. It's the reality of our lives. Merry, happy Christmas. Take care.